announcements before we get started. First of all, you may have noticed that your line is muted, and in fact, all of our lines are muted. That's so that we can avoid getting background noise throughout the course of the webinar, but it does not mean that we don't want you to ask questions. In fact, we would love for you to ask questions. Please feel free to submit them through the chat feature throughout, and there will be Q&A either throughout the webinar or at the end. We do look forward to seeing your questions. Additionally, we've heard from folks in the past that if they're having sound issues, sometimes it's because they're listening to the webinar on their computer. So if that's the case, just pop into your audio box, check out the phone number, and maybe dial in on a telephone if you are having any audio problems. And finally, inevitably, someone will chat in and ask us whether these slides are available online. They are not yet, but the presenters here have graciously agreed to let us record the webinar so that we will, within the next week or so, be able to post this webinar along with the slides, hopefully, online. So do watch out for that. We'll make sure that we send a note out when that goes up. And with that, I will turn it over to Marcia Baslow, who is the Senior Advisor to Deputy Assistant Secretary Linda Smith in the Early Childhood Development webinar, and I'm sorry, the Early Childhood Development Office, and she will kick us off.
Thank you, Tricia. And I'm pleased to be here on behalf of Linda Smith. This is an exciting week in Washington with the Childcare and Development Block Grant Act being signed into law. And Linda and Shannon had to leave to go to the White House. And so we're pleased that that's where they are. And I'm really excited to be able to introduce the webinar. We know that teachers and providers are really the backbone of quality in our programs. And the President's Early Learning Initiative, when it was rolled out, is really a comprehensive early learning agenda. And it's been about having quality early childhood development. We know that ensuring compensation is an important piece of this. ACF is extremely interested in the workforce. We have a wonderful study that is now being in the works with the National Academy of Science, the Science of Children Birth to 8, and that will be released sometime in February. We've been working on the early Head Start Child Care partnerships and pre-K development grants, and we look at this as a strategy, a financing strategy, certainly the beginning of the financing strategy that Marcy and Deborah and Leah are going to talk about. We're pleased to have this kick off our workforce webinar series, and we look forward to having you join us as we continue to have workforce be part of our conversation in 2015. I'm going to turn it over to Deborah. To Leah.
Hi, good morning. Thank you, Marcia. We're really pleased that the Office of Child Care is hosting this webinar and kicking off your webinar as part of your series on the workforce. So you're going to hear today about the status of the workforce from the new report coming out of the center, Worthy Work Still Unlivable Wages. And this report brings forth data. You'll hear new data about the workforce and sort of where we've come in 25 years. You'll hear from two of the primary co-authors of the report, Marcy Whitebook, who's the Director and Senior Researcher at the Center for the Study of Child Care Employment at UC Berkeley, and you'll hear from Deborah Phillips, Professor of Psychology at Georgetown University. And a little bit later, you'll hear from me again. I'm also at the center at UC Berkeley with Marcy, and I co-authored the policy chapter of the report. So we're going to talk a little bit about the current context, again, key findings and new data that are in the report, and we'll talk about policies that impact the workforce and discuss some of the recommendations. And though it can be challenging to do so in a webinar format, we really do want those questions coming in, and we will either, again, take them as they come, or we will have time at the end. We've definitely left time to have questions and discussion. And then I just want to take a moment before we get into the content to thank the funders of this report, because it was quite a lift to get this done, and we could not have done it without their support. That was the Heising Simons Foundation and the W. Clement and Jesse V. Stone Foundation. And with that, I'll turn it to Deborah.
Thank you, Leah. I also want to extend my thanks to Marcia
and in absentia to Linda and Shannon for making this webinar possible so we could talk to all of you and have an exchange with all of you about this new report. So 25 years ago, Marcy Whitebook and Carolee House and I set out to conduct a two-generation study of child care, examining both the quality of care for children and the quality of the work for the adults who were responsible for their early development when they're not at home. I entered into the study as a card-carrying developmental psychologist, deeply worried about the vast variation in child care quality that children experience day in and day out in this country, and very passionate about trying to figure out the active ingredients of quality that most affected children's development and that policy mechanisms could do something about. Little did I imagine then that teacher wages would be one of the most powerful of these ingredients. I came away from the staffing study honestly shocked by the working conditions of child care teachers. Salaries lower than parking lot attendants, are you kidding? And I was deeply touched by their commitment to the children in their care as well as by the economic precariousness of their lives. I was absolutely convinced by the firm link we found between adult working conditions and children's experiences in child care of the urgency of addressing early childhood teachers' compensation and well-being. I haven't changed my mind. In fact, all that we've learned in the intervening years about the exquisite sensitivity of the developing brain to the responsiveness, stimulation, and protection that young children receive from the adults in their lives, and about how quickly stress and depression can undermine adults' capacity to provide this supportive and educational care, has made me more convinced than ever that taking care of children means taking care of their teachers. So about a year ago, Marcy and Carolee and I began to discuss the possibility of taking stock of the state of the early care and education workforce to mark the 25th anniversary of the staffing study. We couldn't begin to redo the staffing study. That would have entailed going back to the 5 staffing study cities and conducting an updated observational study of hundreds of centers. It was a Herculean effort back then, and we were 25 years younger. Today, in addition to the massive undertaking, we would be looking at a very different ecology of child care, and one that would be very difficult to compare to that which existed 25 years ago. We also knew, however, that it would be a challenge to knit together a coherent story from available data, comparing the workforce in 1989 to today's workforce. This is due in part to the changing ecology of early care and education, but also due to the fragmented and siloed state of data on the early childhood workforce. Fortunately, the Office of Planning, Research, and Evaluation in the Department of Health and Human Services has updated the 1990 Profile of Child Care Settings study with the 2012 National Survey of Early Care and Education, giving us a reasonably comparable 22-year window to examine. Head Start has long collected data on its workforce, as has the Department of Defense, and the Bureau of Labor Statistics and the Census Bureau continue to collect annual data on child care workers and preschool teachers. I'm going to share with you what this collection of evidence reveals about the early care and education workforce then and now. Marcy Whitebook will then tell you about the new data regarding economic worries among early care and education teachers and their reliance on public benefits due to their poor wages. Then Leah Austin will share our perceptions of the current policy landscape and our thoughts about creating a pathway on this landscape toward a different future for early childhood teachers and thus for young children. Before jumping into the data here, it is important that you understand that we are stuck with the antiquated Bureau of Labor Statistics and Census Bureau job labels of child care worker and preschool teacher, which perpetuate the false dichotomy between care and education. We do restrict our look at these data to center-based workers. In fact, throughout the report, unless we state otherwise, we focus on center-based teachers and primarily on teachers and lead teachers, not assistant teachers. This is true, for example, in our comparisons of the 2 national surveys, where we also restrict our sample to centers that serve 3 to 5-year-olds.
sometimes exclusively, but often in conjunction with other age groups. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, as was true in 1989, child care workers continue to land at the bottom of the U.S. wage scale, which you see on the far left of the horizontal bar here, rating third out of the 100th percentile in rankings based on wages. We actually still pay those who care for and educate our youngest children on a par with those who walk our dogs, flip our burgers, park our cars, and mix our drinks. Child care worker wages have barely kept pace with the cost of living, increasing by only 1% in real dollars since 1997, a smaller increase than that earned by fast food cooks. Preschool teachers, in the Census Bureau lingo, those who instruct preschool children in activities needed for primary school, have fared somewhat better. Their wages have increased by 15% since 1997, but they still have a long ways to go to catch up with their colleagues who teach primary school. And there's a very unsettling contrast with what has happened to what families pay for early care and education during this same period. Census Bureau data have recently revealed that parent fees for early care and education have increased by nearly 90%, effectively doubling since 1997. 1%, 15%, 90%. We have no idea where that money is going, but clearly not to their children's teachers. The take-home message from this figure, based on 2012 data from the Census Bureau and from the National Survey of Early Care and Education, is the exceedingly low premium that is placed on higher education within the ECE field. This figure reflects annual wages for teachers, all of whom have a bachelor's degree or higher. Among teachers with bachelor's degrees, those who teach kindergarten earn over 20% more than their colleagues who teach pre-kindergarten alongside them in school-sponsored settings. And they earn 60% more than those who teach pre-kindergarten in other settings, including Head Start programs. The exact same stair-step pattern characterized teacher wages at the time of the National Child Care Staffing Study. Degree teachers working with infants and toddlers still earn less than those who work with preschoolers. And comparisons to the other end of the spectrum show that early childhood teachers with bachelor's degrees earn half the wages of women and 1/3 the wages of men in the civilian labor force who also have bachelor's degrees. How can we possibly expect to attract the best and the brightest to this field, even among those who want to teach young children? Equally striking and disturbing was the variation we saw in wages and qualifications across different sectors within the early care education market, relying on different funding streams and operating under different auspices and sponsors. Moreover, sectors of the market that were characterized by improvements in qualifications did not coincide with sectors characterized by improvements in wages. Head Start, for example, has made remarkable progress in filling its classroom with well-trained and educated teachers. The majority of Head Start teachers now have a bachelor's degree in early childhood education or a related field. And wages in Head Start improved between 1997 and 2007, but then completely stagnated despite ongoing dramatic increases in teacher qualifications. This is why we use terms like illogical, irrational, and inequitable to describe the compensation structure in early care and education. Turnover, fueled in part by unlivable wages, continues to deplete investments in professional development. And while turnover has slowed, it has slowed in all areas of teaching. And it remains at levels recorded during the mid-1970s. Can't we do better than that? Over the past 25 years, our knowledge about the vital importance of the first 5 years of life has exploded. Our expectations of early care and education's role in closing the achievement gap have risen dramatically, and vast numbers of early childhood teachers have worked hard to improve their educational credentials. And yet we have failed to assure them wages that correspond to their educational levels, that will free them from economic worry,
and that will enable them to support their families without relying on public benefits. It's to these latter two stories that Marcy will now turn.
Okay. Hi, thank you, Deborah. Thank you, ACS, Office of Childcare, and Leah. And I just wanted to say to people is that there was not the webinar link did not include a link to the report, but if you go to the Center for the Study, but you're going to send it, and also you can get a link to the report on the center website as well. So, but it will be sent. I want to also just for a moment say that I want to give a special thanks to the other Center for the Study of Childcare Employment staff who aren't here today, Laura Sakai, Fran Kipnis, Srihina Basi, and Megan Delahoy, who, when you get to the link and you see the links of the report, this would have never happened without their incredibly hard work. More than 4 decades ago, as a recent college graduate, I chose a career as a nursery school teacher. My experience as a Head Start volunteer in high school first drew me to child development and how early childhood programs could help to address poverty and inequality. As a young feminist, working to provide good child care seemed like a perfect fit for me. I was, moreover, and importantly, enthralled by witnessing and facilitating how children learned. But it quickly became apparent that there was something amiss. Many parents could not find or afford good services. Only some teachers had access to education and training. Only a handful of programs paid a decent wage. And I witnessed one skilled fellow teacher after another leave to pursue a career that offered greater respect and reward. Repeatedly, I was told that I could do something more with my college degree. No doubt I could have made more money teaching older children or in almost any other line of work. But then as now, I viewed teaching young children as a much-needed service to our nation. So along with a handful of my colleagues, some of whom are no doubt listening in today, we set out to expand and improve child care and to secure the rights, raises, and respect for early childhood teachers that it would allow them to provide what children and families needed and deserved. But as the title of our report makes clear, and as our findings underscore, our efforts and those of so many others who have joined us over the years have not panned out as we had hoped. It pains me that today, recent college graduates still rightly perceive early childhood teaching as a pathway to poverty. The work of teaching young children is highly skilled and complex. Personally, it's the most intellectually challenging work I have ever done, also physically challenging. It is imperative that early childhood teachers know about typical and atypical child development, and they have to understand the importance of play in children's learning and know how to use that play to promote learning across multiple domains, including developing mathematical understanding, building the skills for literacy, and many other things as well. Additionally, teachers must be skilled in helping children develop important lifelong personal dispositions, such as task persistence. These skills must be applied in the context of working with children and other adults, including parents from a variety of cultures and economic backgrounds, and increasingly children who are dual language learners and children who have special developmental needs. At the same time, many teachers are also attending school while working full-time, not only to advance their skills and knowledge, but undoubtedly with the hope of improving their economic status. These teachers are striving to meet our 21st century expectations, only to find themselves earning 20th century wages. We sought to understand more about the consequences of low pay against the backdrop of these expectations we now hold for the teachers of young children. Economic insecurity, as Deborah mentioned, fuels stress and depression among adults, and we know from studies of mothers affects their interactions with children. Our examination of economic insecurity reminds us that many early childhood teachers are also parents whose children face the very risks associated with being poor that so many of our early care and education policies seek to ameliorate. If you turn to Chapter 4 of the report, that's where we dive further into the issue of economic security. And what we describe there is a study we conducted in one state with more than 600 center-based teaching staff. They were surveyed about worry about their family's economic well-being, as well about workplace policies that influence their earnings. So we asked them about things like being able to pay their monthly bills, pay for transportation to and from work, having enough, whether they worried about having enough money to for food for their families, and also about paying their rent and a host of other things about their economic status. But we also asked them about employment policies that affect earnings, such as worry about being laid off, having their benefits reduced, having their hours reduced, being sent home for unexpected absences or center closures, being able to losing days pay if they have to deal with some kind of family issue, and not getting a raise. If you look at the slide now on your screens, you see that those who earned, well, let me just say one other thing I forgot for a moment, is that we also, the staff that we interviewed, about half of them had an associate's or higher degree, and they were employed in a relatively high-quality sample of centers that included for-profit, nonprofit, Head Start, and public pre-K programs. So if you look at the slide on the far left, you see that those who earned less than $12.50 per hour and those with dependent children expressed more worry about having enough food for their families than their colleagues earning higher wages and those without dependent children. And even teachers with associate or higher degrees reported economic worries. They were less worried, but they also had worries about their families and worries about program policies, such as being sent home without pay due to an unexpected closure or low attendance. And to look at that, if you go to page 53, figure 4.9, you see those data. Significantly, overall worry scores were found among teaching staff employed in higher quality programs and those that were publicly funded. Overall worry expressed by teaching staff was significantly higher among those working in for-profit compared to nonprofit programs. It's troubling to imagine the stress that is induced from such worry while simultaneously being responsible for a classroom of children. Low pay not only fuels worry, but it leads many in the early childhood workforce to augment their earnings with public support. Using census data, we were able to look at participation rates in public support programs among those who define themselves as child care workers. This particular analysis includes both those center-based teachers as well as home-based providers. Our analysis focused on 4 programs: the Federal Earned Income Tax Credit, EITC, Medicaid and the Children's Health Insurance Program, Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP or food stamps, and Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, TANF, the layer of which was utilized but by only 2% of child care worker families. 46% of child care workers, compared to 25% of the U.S. workforce, resided in families enrolled in at least one public support program annually between 2007 and 2011. Participation rates in public support programs varied little by whether child care workers were employed full or part-time. But child care workers who earned less than the proposed 10-10 federal minimum wage were 1.5 times more likely to reside in families participating in public support programs than were those in which the child care worker earned more than 10-10 per hour. Participation rates in public support programs were highest among single-parent child care workers and among workers with at least one child under 5 years old. At every level of worker education, from not yet having a high school diploma up to a BA or higher degree, participation in public support programs was higher for child care worker families than for the families of all U.S. workers with comparable education, again underscoring the low premium placed on education within our workforce. The estimated cost of reliance on these public benefits by child care workers and their families is approximately $2.4 billion per year. Okay, good. Okay. It's our assessment. I'm sorry. We've talked about this study several times in the last couple of days, so sometimes you're going, oh, did I just say that or not? Our nation has an uneven playing field on which the wages of teachers depend more on the ages of the children they teach and where they work than on their qualifications. Economic insecurity linked to wages is endemic, especially among teachers who have children of their own. It's a lose-lose-lose because parents are paying a lot, children aren't getting what they're needing, and certainly our teachers are not. But we're particularly concerned that our teachers who are working full-time are struggling to think about feeding their families. We need, in the words of the 1990s Worthy Wage Campaign, to find a much better and more equitable way to help parents pay and to attract teachers and help them stay, something that our Department of Defense, a handful of state pre-K programs, and most other industrialized nations have managed to accomplish. It's our hope that this new evidence will spur the nation to not only aspire to, but to achieve livable, equitable, and dependable wages for early childhood teachers, of whom we expect so much, but to whom we still provide so little. Deborah, Carol Lee, and I are very clear that we will not do the next round of the study, but we have chosen its title, Worthy Work, Finally Livable Wages, Early Childhood Teaching in the U.S. We hope that report can be written sooner than 2039. So now I'm going to turn it over to Leah, who's going to tell you how much our current policies are helping us to get there, and she'll also review some of our recommendations about how we can move forward to that goal. Thank you.
So as you can see from the quote on the slide that you're looking at, more than a decade and a half ago, the National Academy of Sciences recommended a two-pronged approach to improving the quality of early care and education. But to date, our investments in quality improvement have primarily focused on the first part of that recommendation, namely professional development and quality initiatives to improve the education and training levels of the workforce. So for this report, we reviewed the primary federal, state, and local quality improvement and workforce policies to learn if and how compensation strategies are being advanced. What we found is that while over the past 25 years there have been significant efforts, and as Marcy and Deborah have identified, to increase early childhood teacher qualifications, it appears to be an implicit assumption that professional salaries will follow these increases in education and qualifications. The task of creating intentional, sustainable policies for improving the compensation and work environments of the workforce as a whole, despite the recommendations of the National Academy of Sciences and others, has gone largely unaddressed. There are some exceptions, most notably, which has been mentioned, is the Department of Defense childcare system that requires compensation at rates equivalent to that of other military employees with comparable training, seniority, and experience. And some public pre-K programs pay teachers comparably to their counterparts in the K-12 system. So once you start digging a little deeper, you see that there are some differences between parity and comparability, where one may have the same salary scale and benefits with K-12, and another system may require that teachers have the same starting salaries, but may not have the same salary scale or benefits to go along with that. There's other differences in these pre-K pay requirements that we discussed in more detail in the report. And again, just so if you wanted to have the report now, you can just Google Center for the Study of Child Care Employment and find the report on our page, but it will also be sent out after the webinar to everybody as well. But most importantly, what we found is that improving compensation has been left to discretionary and sporadic initiatives, such as stipends or bonuses. These are often characterized by insufficient funding, are limited in scope, compete for quality improvement funds with professional development and other important and pressing priorities. They frequently have to rely on short-term funding, and they're not reaching most of the early childhood teaching workforce. This is not to discount these initiatives. They have really important impacts and can serve as a source of relief for those that receive such stipends or bumps in income. As we heard on from Tuesday, Angie Robertson, who's a teacher or was a former teacher, she talked about her coworkers having to use their credit cards to pay for rent and buy food. So something like a stipend can be very helpful to provide that relief to help somebody, pay a bill or go towards paying debt. But the structure does not fundamentally change the irrational wage structure, which Deborah described for us. Despite the stagnation, though, that we've seen and the challenges with the policies that do exist or the lack of policies that we have, we do see that there is a path forward. Today is a new day, and we can think about how, what are the opportunities for advancement. And though teachers have long known this from their own experiences, the context of what we know about children's development and well-being as linked to the adults in their communities or adults in their lives is documented and becoming more widely understood by research, policy, and advocacy communities. And so to move us forward, it's our assessment that a focused and comprehensive reassessment of the nation's early care and education policies is needed to develop a well-defined strategy for financing early care and education services. Such a strategy is required to address the need for equitable teacher wages aligned with educational levels across ECE settings for children from birth to 5, while also relieving the tremendous cost burden that so many working families face. We call upon policymakers at all levels, those of you who are on this webinar, and other stakeholders ranging from business and finance leaders to early childhood teachers and parents, to identify a sustainable, dedicated source of public funding to upgrade the compensation of the workforce, and again, to relieve the burden that families are experiencing. And also to create a rational and equitable set of guidelines for determining regionally based entry-level wages and salary increases, as well as workplace standards for teachers to effectively engage in the complex work of teaching children. Or as we heard Megan Gunner say earlier this week from the University of Minnesota, she sort of aptly described this as the complex work of developing brains. There are also immediate opportunities that offer fertile ground for making inroads into improving early childhood employment and services within the current system. We recommend that workplace and compensation policies become essential features of state QRIS criteria and as a benchmark of pre-K quality, in line with some of the language in the preschool development and expansion criteria, which calls for comparable salaries for pre-K and K-12 teachers. That when Head Start is next reauthorized, increased and earmarked funding for aligning teaching staff salaries with their dramatically increased qualification should be at the center of that reauthorization. That federal and state policies regarding quality improvement funds should be revised to ensure that professional development and compensation efforts, rather than competing with each other, be linked with appropriately dedicated funds. That funds be made available to help states to build, strengthen, and sustain data systems such as workforce registries that can help to capture the extent to which members of the workforce participate in education and professional development activities, receive compensation increases, and remain in the field. And lastly, that researchers who study early care and education policy and both the developmental and societal impacts of early care and education renew attention to the adult work environment and teacher well-being as critical elements affecting developmentally supportive practices in ECE settings, as well as cost benefits of these settings' impacts in the short and longer term. In 1989, Marcy, Deborah, and Carolee concluded that the evidence from the staffing study revealed a shaky foundation upon which to build a structure to house and nurture our children while their parents earn a living. The shaky foundation of poor wages, turnover, and vast variation across differing program auspices has not been stabilized and still poses a hazard to young children and their families. Another 25 years is a bit too long to wait to improve early childhood jobs as a matter of justice to the early childhood workforce, to their own families, and to the children and families that they serve. So we thank you for going through this with us and your attention to this. And I think that we have some questions that have come in.
So we do have a couple of questions, but we don't have a lot yet. So I mean, guessing everyone was just holding their questions till the end of the webinar. Now is the time. Type those questions in. But we will answer the ones that we've got. So first of all, the first question we've got is, was the 90% increase in child care cost inflation adjusted as you did with wages?
Yes, it is. Those are inflation-adjusted numbers. And when you get the report, just go to figure 3.2, and you'll see the unadjusted and adjusted numbers. So the 90% is based on the adjusted numbers.
Great. Thank you. Secondly, do you consider the value of free and discounted child care that many teachers receive when calculating compensation?
We don't really have clear data about what percentage of teachers are receiving free and discounted child care. We do, in the studies we do at the center, ask about that. We do know that in terms of the support teachers get, our analysis doesn't include that. We didn't include child care specifically in the information we said about economic worry. We also don't have any information about housing supports as well. I think it's also important to realize, though, that there are a lot of benefits that our teachers are not getting, that, such as paid sick leave, paid planning time, paid time off for required professional development. So I think we need more careful examination when we're looking at issues of quality and teacher quality to what the adult working environment is like and what kind of supports are in place for teachers to really provide, to function as professionals and to provide for children what they need to succeed. So, you know, there's more work to be done on really understanding that, and we have a measure at our center now called the Sequel, where we begin to use that to look at quality, so we're not just looking at degree level, which is very important, or education level, but also looking about whether or not the environment is supporting teachers to apply what they know and build their skills.
Thank you, Marcy. The next question is from someone who is wondering, if you were speaking with legislators, what would you all recommend as one or 2 points that to inform them about?
I can start on
that. You go.
Deborah. Yes, Deborah. I would start with 2 points. One is sort of the what is at stake question. And, you know, what is at stake is really the fact that these teachers are responsible for children during a period of time when children are experiencing the most rapid brain development of any other stage in life. So what is at stake is the brain development of young children. And their future capacity to learn and to be innovative and productive citizens, frankly. That's not hyperbole. And the second point I would make is that there's a great deal of rhetoric now about the return on investment that you get from early childhood education. A lot of people are touting early childhood education as the answer to almost everything you can imagine in our society today. And Nick Kristof just had a column in the New York Times yesterday basically quoting Jim Heckman yet again on the same point. But virtually all of the programs for which we have the data on return on investment pay teachers equitable wages. So Boston, Tulsa paid pre-K teachers on the same as they pay K teachers, and the parent and child centers, and you know, all the Abecedarian and so on. So really the return depends on adequate wages for the teachers. If you start paring back on those wages, you're not going to get the return on investment that everyone's hoping for.
And this is Leah, just to reiterate Deborah's point. We know legislators like to see things quickly and in brief, and I think what supports Deborah's point about the premium and equity of wages is the slide that we had, and this information is in the report as well, on showing the mean annual salary of teachers with degrees sort of compared to the civilian labor force, elementary school teachers, kindergarten teachers, and you really can just very visually see the dramatic differences.
Great. So someone here indicates that some of our teachers have declined deserved pay increases because the amount does not offset the support from public support programs. How do we address that?
This is Marcy. I mean, I think we basically have to say to legislators and to everybody that the way we finance our current system just doesn't work. Parents are paying too much of their income for the most part, and you can't fix this problem by charging parents more. Our subsidy policies, you know, in many states have seen cutbacks over the years, so it's not, we're always trading off how many families we can serve, and so we serve them too low. The reimbursement rates are very low. So I think we have to basically say that we need to finance things differently. And I think one of the things that's happening in a lot of communities is people are talking about creating a living wage, raising the minimum wage, and then what happens is the early childhood community says, well, we can't participate in that because we don't have any place to get the money. And so the little raises that people are offering to teachers often are not as much as the public benefit. So I think the only way we can really do that is by financing differently and breaking the link between what families are paying and what we're paying teachers. And in San Francisco, it's really interesting. They have a living wage campaign. They actually have a fund that allows them to pay early childhood teachers more and give them, they'll allow you to do that. So part of the reason we have this situation, and we hear this a lot too, is because the raises we're offering teachers are, very well intentioned, but there are not enough to make up for this difference. And so and I think it's interesting going back to the economic worry. We looked at, well, where did you really see a significant drop in worry? And it wasn't when you got $1 above minimum wage. It wasn't even at the proposed federal minimum wage. It was much more in line with some of the minimum wages that are being set by cities where they've done an analysis of what people need to be able to support themselves.
Thank you. Questions are now coming in. People are excited and ready. Let's take a look at what we've got next. All right. Now, this is a good question. Are there any recommendations for how early child care centers can start increasing wages and compensation right away? For example, are there other funding sources to pursue? Is there a way to raise awareness? Do you guys have any ideas on that?
I was going to say, Marcy, I think it speaks to sort of the response you were just giving and maybe kind of...
Well, so I was just in Wisconsin, and people there are really thinking about, we were talking a lot about this issue, and so one of the things that people were saying is that really beginning to do the education with parents about where their child care dollars go. I think parents' experience is that they are paying so much and they're struggling so hard to pay it, and they do the math, and they see, well, like all this money is coming in, why isn't it going to people? So I think one of the things is letting parents really talking about these issues, to use these data, we hope, as an opportunity to say, this isn't really working. We don't want to ask you to do this on your backs, but we can't also support ourselves and really stay and do it for your children, or we're doing a tremendous sacrifice. That being said, I think there are some, we heard stories of in certain communities where people were going to their business leaders who are saying they care about early childhood, and at least having the business community make some contribution that can be used, whether it's making sure that there's like working computers in classrooms, or maybe supporting some small reward for people. I think it's also really important to be, if there's any activity going on in communities around minimum wage or paid sick days or any of the things, to really talk about the need for establishing some kind of community fund that can help at least make some of those small changes. So I think that in many ways, I think in our field, we haven't known how to do this, so we've stopped talking about it over the last 25 years, particularly after the Worthy Wage campaign sort of quieted down a little bit. And I think we have to talk about this problem. We have to really say that we are not doing anybody any favor by not addressing it. It's a public will question, and we can't build that public will until people understand what the problem is. And as long as parents are experiencing it as their personal problem and teachers are sort of saying there's nothing we can do, we're going to be stuck. So I think we have to begin to say this is a problem, we need a different way of financing, and in that process I do believe that will come forward some small amounts of money that can make a little difference, but ultimately we really have to build a campaign in our country that says, you know, we need more support for children from day one and to really provide the kinds of early learning experiences that we know are necessary for the brains of our future.
So our next question is whether you all know, does the QRIS system, the Quality Rating and Improvement System, in any state look at compensation along with teacher qualifications in regards to program quality?
This is Leah. We looked at QRIS systems several years ago, so we know that there have been more that have come online since we looked at them, and we have done a scan of some of the newer systems. But what we typically find is that compensation is not included in QRIS as a benchmark or sort of different levels as you move up in tiers or ratings. We did find a couple of programs, LA, which is a county or local-based program, it wasn't statewide, but LA had compensation specifically in their QRIS. I do know they've had some changes with their system, and I don't know if that has been maintained. But LA was one of two, and I apologize that the second one doesn't come to mind, but that really was it. Typically, when you saw things related to compensation or benefits, what items were things like having a salary scale, which is certainly a good thing, that there is some indication that you've got increases based on perhaps education and experience and tenure, but very, very little language overall related to increases or related to benchmarking salary, either at a starting level or to education.
And this is Marcy. I just want to add that the Wisconsin Early Childhood Association just put out a paper. Peggy Hack and her colleagues wrote this paper, and if you go to the WICA website, you can find it. My apologies to my Wisconsin friends, because the name of your report has slipped my mind for the moment, but they did a really interesting analysis where they looked at how it's not just that we're not putting compensation into QRIS, but in many instances we're creating a lot of, people are, as you go up, paying for quality gets harder, and programs are struggling. Even programs that are meeting the quality standards, they're struggling financially to meet those standards. And then they did an analysis of if you added comparable, better wages for people, programs would actually be losing money on the available sources of income now. So I think it's a really important report to look at, to understand some of these issues and to talk about them. And then I think we will be soon going back to the Child Trends has just set up this wonderful database about QRIS, and we want to repeat the analysis that we did in 2010 that looks at these issues, and we'll stay tuned to our website and we'll be letting you know more about that.
And if you are in Wisconsin and know the name of that report, feel free to chat it in.
Oh, yes,
if you are the non-LA program that Leah was referring to, feel free to chat it as well. Have you all looked at the difference of unionized teachers versus non-unionized teachers, and have statewide collective bargaining, helped improve wages?
Going back to the original staffing study, we did ask a question about unionization, and we actually did find that programs that were unionized paid higher wages. We don't have a lot of we don't have the data there to answer that question, although my understanding is that the National Survey of Early Care and Education does actually have questions about unionization. So I think though that analysis will be forthcoming at some point. We'll be able to look at that question.
Yeah, and I think there was a question as well about children in after-school programs. And I, again, believe that the national survey has questions. I mean, they get all of the ages of the children that are served in these programs, both home and center-based, actually. So that survey is a real gold mine of current data on the landscape of all different forms of child care for all different ages of children. So, you know, that'll be, information on that will be forthcoming for sure. Great. So someone commented that it's great to recommend Head Start qualifications align with fees, but when the vast majority of child care teachers are employed in small, non-subsidized settings, how does they make headway? If the center tries to pay them better than other centers, they tend to be priced out of the market. Everyone here is nodding in agreement and a little bit of puzzlement.
I think that is fundamentally the problem, that the way, you know, the way we've structured early childhood programs in our country is that we're relying primarily on parent fees, and that, you know, if you look at why the Department of Defense program is successful, is the link was broken between parent fees and the qualifications and pay of staff. And so it's not that parents don't pay. They're on a sliding scale. I think, if I have this right, they don't pay more than 10%,
right?
It's or 8 or
15. It's not
10,
much. Yeah.
You know, they pay a portion of their income based on what they can afford, much as sort of some, you know, healthcare is now for people who are using the exchanges. So I think that we need to figure out a way to break that link, because as long as you're, you know, and whoever sent in that question, you're right, the majority of people are not touched by the initiatives that do anything to address salaries. I mean, pre-K, public pre-K teachers, that's expanding, but it's like 6% of the workforce are working in those programs. And we know there are a lot of military childcare programs, but it doesn't touch everybody, and, you know, Head Start similarly. So I think it is time to say we have done our best trying to improve and deliver quality, and we've made great strides in the field over the last 25 years. And, you know, I'm sometimes just amazed at how many people have gone back to school and gotten their education, how many people have really worked to think through, you know, figuring out what are the components of quality. But, you know, I think we're promising we can't deliver it on a pittance for the people doing the work, and we can't do it on the backs of parents. So I think it really is time to say, you know, I know people are tired of me saying this because I've been saying it for years, but we need to find a better way, and it's really time to have that conversation.
So sort of speaking actually of the training and education increase, while training requirements for training and education have increased dramatically since 1999, there are also opportunities to access free education scholarships. However, we're finding that teachers move to other fields when they have achieved higher degrees. Did you find the same in your study? Sorry, I just lost my train of thought.
Well, you're catching your thought, Deborah.
Yes.
I will just say that the name of the Wisconsin report is Starting Early, Starting Now, Investing in Teachers to Grow Child Care Quality. And you can get it at wisconsinearlychildhood.org.
And we'll send out the link at the end of the webinar.
Great. And somebody also would like the link to the National Survey of Early Care and Education, which is the survey I've been referring to, the 2012 data set. Yeah, so the question is, moving to other fields when they achieve higher degrees. I mean, absolutely. And again, you know, part of what the military has done is, in addition to kind of unlinking parent fees and teacher wages, is that they have put all child care and early education teachers on the military wage scale. So everybody in the military is rewarded similarly for their education and their experience and their qualifications. So there's no incentive for a pre-K teacher in the military to suddenly become, an elementary school teacher. And the same is true in the States with these pre-K programs where they put teachers on the same wage scale as K-12 teachers. Under virtually any other circumstance, there is a huge incentive to leave childcare work to go to other jobs. So yes, that happens. In the report that we have, that we've been talking about today, we don't have that longitudinal data that you're asking for, but other people, and Marcy and her colleagues have looked at that in other areas. So being cognizant of time, I will mention one thing, I will ask one more question, and then I will turn it back over to Marcia to wrap up. So someone else did mention that Pennsylvania does have an Education and Retention Award that is linked to the Career Lattice, which is linked with QRIS and ranges from $600 to $4,120. So feel free to talk with your colleagues in Pennsylvania to learn more about that. Our last question is, hold on, we're discussing what our last question is. All right, so the decision is that we're going to do both. So we'll start with, do you know what the average turnover of child care teachers is in profit versus nonprofit? Yeah, so I can do that one quickly, just because we have that table in the report. So when you get the report, go to table 3.5. It is just as it was in the staffing study and in the profile study 25 years ago. Turnover is worse in the for-profit market. But we have that all broken out in a table. We have a little bit of data from Head Start on why people leave, and about a third of those who leave mention compensation in the Head Start data. And then,
this is an older study that we did of what we call infrastructure organizations in California a few years ago, where these were things like our resource and referral agencies, our First Five organizations, our child care planning councils, and we wanted to figure out who was in those, who was doing those jobs and whether or not they'd been teachers. And I don't have the exact numbers, but it's on our website. But one of the things we found that was many of the people who were working those organizations were former early childhood teachers, and when we asked why were you doing this work now instead of other work, it was because of the wages. So we don't do enough of that kind of longitudinal data, and I think that's part of why we have that recommendation that we should be looking. We've not just disconnected getting people educated and qualified from paying them more, but when we do research, we really don't look at how much money we're investing into professional development and education, and then what's happening to people's career trajectories. I think Teach is really the only place where you see those data, and they do a really good job of when there is compensation linked and you see people staying in. But we do have this, this exodus, and we also have this situation where the way the job is currently paid, we don't have, it is not a big selling point for recent college graduates to come do the work.
So before I ask our last question, I will let you know we did not get to all of the questions, but we will make sure that we send the full list to Marcy, Deborah, Leah, and actually Deputy Assistant Secretary Linda Smith and Shannon Rudisill, so that they at least know what questions are out in the field. And we will end on this question. Is there a strong correlation between compensation and quality of care and student future success?
Yes.
Yes. Well, thanks for coming,
So there are a couple studies, including some reanalyses of the original staffing study data, but other studies that have kind of put everything in the bucket and looked at what is the strongest predictor of the quality of the environment for the children. And wages pop up at the top. It absolutely blew my mind, But now I think we know why. And I think Marcy's data on economic stress and reliance on public assistance, there's some data on depression among child care workers, and we know that stress and depression make it very difficult for adults to do the incredibly complex work of taking care of young children, whether they're mothers or child care teachers or whoever, because it truly is rocket science, and you have to be on top of your game every nanosecond. And what happens is the interactions become more sporadic, less dependent on what the kids are doing. The children begin to feel, they get more intrusive, they get more withdrawn, the teachers do when they're stressed and depressed, just like mothers. And we've now linked that kind of intrusive and sensitive caregiving in childcare to elevated stress hormones in children, to greater anxiety and vigilance in their behavior, to compromised immune functioning in children, and parent reports of their children having more infections. So we can no longer pretend that we don't know why wages matter for children. We're seeing some very distressing outcomes in children in situations where teachers are stressed.
And I want to just add one other thing is that there's a sort of, we used to say when the first study came out, that good things went together in early childhood. So when you had higher wages, you had better training, you had better work environments. Well, bad things go together in early childhood too. So the lower the wages, you also have less support. It's not just that the reward is lower, but you also tend to have people who have less skill and knowledge about doing the work, and you have less supports on the job to help people engage in professional practice. You don't have enough staff. You don't have enough time to provide individualized attention to children. You don't have time to take breaks. You don't necessarily have enough equipment. You don't have, it goes on and on. So I think that it's a complex story, and I just want to end on a slightly positive note, which is that we know this matters, and we also just, our hats are off to all the people who do this work every day, because even up against these conditions, people manage overall to really attend to children and facilitate their learning, but at a tremendous cost to themselves and to their own families. So we, and I think it's important that we really say we need more for people so that they can do what they do with and really be able to focus on it without so much stress for themselves.
On behalf of the Administration for Children and Families, we really want to thank Marcy and Leah and Deborah and Tricia for putting together the webinar today. Enormously important information, and we do know this matters. Marcy, we will be sending out the link to the report so that you can get a copy of the report. We will also be sending out the link to the Wisconsin report. We thank you for your questions. Please send them in, and we will share them. And we need to keep this conversation going. So if you have some comments that you would like to submit, the Office of Child Care, the Office of Early Childhood Development, and the Office of Head Start are always open to hearing your comments. And they can also send Marcy.
Well, let me personally, but the Web Center, our website,
and we'll be happy to share some of those.
We'll share them around and make sure you get your answers.
Thank you for joining the webinar. We look forward to bringing you future webinars on the workforce.
That was a lot of